to get started. Right. Okay. Thank you for everybody who's tuning in. This is the Fairweather Report with Daryl Fairweather. That's me. I'm Redfin's chief economist. I am going to share my screen now. Oh, there we go. Let me get the layout right. Great. All right. Thank you for coming. I'm Daryl Fairweather. I am Redfin's chief economist. And I'm going to be talking about the latest Redfin housing market data. We release this data every single week on Thursdays, and here I am on Thursday afternoon to talk about it. I'm also going to be talking about other current events like the decline in personal savings, the downturn in consumer sentiment that is paradoxically coming at a time when consumer spending is still quite strong. I'm also gonna be talking about some other housing market trends, like how affordability is actually improving, but maybe it's too little too late. I'll be talking about investor purchases of homes, and also I'll be talking about, what was it? Cash purchases of homes. But first things first, let's talk about the most recent housing market data. So, the thing that I have been watching for in the housing market data is that we saw an increase in pending sales starting in April, and it was sustained through the beginning of May. But then mortgage rates started to increase recently when Trump and his associates went to China to negotiate a deal on the war in Iran about the Strait of Hormuz reopening. They came back pretty much empty-handed from that trip. There wasn't any progress, and that sent mortgage rates higher. And we've seen some fluctuations in terms of the outlook for the Strait of Hormuz reopening, but for the most part, mortgage rates are still quite high. There is still no timeline for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which means that inflation expectations are still high, gas prices are still high, and because inflation expectations are high, that pushes up mortgage rates. Oh, someone said the music is loud. I'm muting the music. All right, sorry about that. Thank you for somebody who's doing that over on TikTok. Okay, cool. Anyway, so mortgage rates are quite high, and when mortgage rates are high, that makes housing affordability worse. And if housing affordability is worse, fewer people can buy homes, we should see a decline in demand for homes. So what I'm looking for in the data this week is that resulting in fewer pending sales? Pending sales means somebody has made an offer on a home and that offer has been accepted. So if high mortgage rates are stopping people from making offers, then we should see that show up in the pending sales data pretty much right away, because pending sales just represent how many offers were accepted that week. And what we see in the data is that US pending home sales fell 1.5% from a week earlier. So that seems to indicate to me that home buyers are being impacted by these higher mortgage rates. And like I said, these higher mortgage rates are pretty much a direct result of the Strait of Hormuz being closed. So it seems like this is really going to put a damper on the housing market. And this is a very important time of year for the housing market. We're at the end of May. This is when the weather is beautiful all around the country. This is when people are having open houses and they are expecting buyers to come in and make offers on their homes. But what we're seeing right now is that buyer demand is starting to dampen because of the impact of mortgage rates. We saw this last week when mortgage rates went up and mortgage rates are still high, and then we're seeing it another week. So unfortunately, if I had to make a verdict on like how the spring housing market is going to shake out, it's not looking good. Like we saw some momentum in April, beginning of May, but now that mortgage rates have gone up, that momentum has slowed down. Now all of this could change if there's a deal announced and the Strait of Hormuz was announced to reopen. We would probably see mortgage rates drop right away because mortgage rates are about expectations. So even if the deal is that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be reopened 6 months from now, it's a very long timeline, but it would drop mortgage rates right away because mortgage rates are based on expectations about where the economy is going to be for the next decade. Right now, there's a lot of volatility in those expectations in prices because there's this back and forth about, like, when is the Strait of Hormuz actually going to reopen? How close are we to a deal? Information comes out of the White House that we're close to a deal, then Iran says that something else, that, like, the deal they have in mind is something totally different than what the White House is saying, and all of this uncertainty about even where we're at right now pushes mortgage rates up. Because if investors can't assess where we are right now, they cannot assess where we will be in the future, and then they add in a risk premium for the future, and that increases mortgage rates. But if that uncertainty were to go away, if we had a deal announced that was like, yes, with certainty, everybody signed off, the everybody's gotten their pen and signed the deal, and this is for sure going to happen, that would send mortgage rates down, and we would have a better sense of where the economy would be in the future. We'd be more optimistic about where the economy is going to be in the future in terms of inflation, and that would send mortgage rates down. But until we get definitive news about the Strait of Hormuz and the war in Iran, we're probably going to be dealing with these higher mortgage rates, which is going to slow down demand and slow down pending sales. But demand is just really one half of the housing market. You also see things happening on the supply side. Um, One thing I'm tracking is new listings. Let's see, new listings. New listings a couple of weeks ago were down. Now new listings are up 0.5% year over year, so really not that great of an improvement, but at least we're heading in the right direction in terms of more sellers being willing to list. Now, because there are fewer buyers out there, those sellers are probably going to have to accept lower prices if they actually want to sell those homes. But it's good to see sellers coming back into the market because so many of them have been experiencing the lock-in effect, that they got mortgage rates that were way below what mortgage rates are right now because they locked in during the pandemic when rates were like 3%. Now rates are close to 7%, so it's very expensive for them to sell and buy again, so they don't wanna sell. But now we're seeing a bit more sellers. So even though buyers are backing off, at least sellers are coming to the table. They're going to have to lower their price expectations. You actually already see that because sale prices are up 2.2% year over year, but asking prices are only up 1.9%, which shows that sellers are finally starting to lower their expectations, even more in terms of the growth rate. They're lowering their expectations. Still median asking price is above sale price. They're still, like, not exactly pricing exactly right, but they're getting closer to where the market is at. Now I see some questions from over on TikTok. I have a question about, I have so many questions. Let's see. I'll start at the bottom. Are we still at 50% more sellers? Are the home demand even across all home values? Yeah, that's something that I can look up in our Redfin data center. So we have this brand the new renovated Redfin data center where I can put the dashboard between the balance of power between buyers and sellers. This is a metric that the Redfin economics team has come up with based on internal metrics of demand and also data from public sources like the MLS that gives us information on listings and pending sales. And we are at 46.5% more sellers than there are buyers. Let's scroll down and look at how this looks over time. So you can see this in this graphic here, that as I said, the number of sellers is starting to increase. The number of buyers was also starting to increase, but this number of buyers probably gonna level off, maybe even go down. So I think we're probably gonna get an even bigger gap between the number of sellers that are on the market versus the number of buyers that are on the market for as long as these mortgage rates remain elevated. Somebody asked about if we see any premiums that come with solar panels. I don't have data on that right in front of me, but that's a good question. As energy prices increase, you would think that people would be more interested in homes that are energy efficient, that give them lower energy bills. I don't I would be surprised if that's like a behavior that people are pivoting on right away. I would think that solar panels are probably about as valuable as they've always been, and that recent events haven't changed that. All right. But, back to this weekly data. Is there anything else that I see that is interesting? Let's look at the local data. So obviously locally, real estate's always local. There are gonna be differing trends. In terms of sale prices, prices are up the most in San Francisco, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and Nassau County, and down the most in San Jose, Orlando, Phoenix, Portland, and Fort Worth. Maybe a bit surprised San Francisco is so far up in San Jose going down. But San Jose was up last year, so this is really just what's happening in San Jose. I think in general, the San Jose and San Francisco markets are up if we're zooming out like 2 years as opposed to just 1 year. But in terms of pending sales, sales are up the most in West Palm Beach. Again, they were, like, having a really bad year last year, so that's more recovery. Sales are up a lot in San Francisco, This is I did a maybe YouTube video about this if anybody wants to check it out, but AI money is really fueling the San Francisco real estate market, leading to many more sales at higher prices, and it's really concentrated in the luxury end of the market there. And when we talk to our agents, they say that it's people with $500,000 signing bonuses because they got jobs at these AI companies that are fueling all the demand in San Francisco. So that's an interesting and unique trend that's happening there. It's not happening in Seattle. Seattle is another tech hub, but they don't have as much AI money, as much AI economy there. So not doesn't have the same sales as San Francisco. Seattle's been a pretty weak market, maybe one of the weakest in terms of sales and prices. So yes, real estate is always local. Back to prices. Prices are continue to be strong in the Midwest, like the cheaper parts of the Northeast, like Pittsburgh, and that will probably continue because the Midwest and those post-industrial Rust Belt type cities are some of the most affordable markets in the country. They're some of the last places where you can buy a home on a middle class income. So because they're affordable, they're probably going to keep going, keep becoming more expensive until they stop being affordable, unfortunately. Somebody asked about Detroit. So yeah, I can pull up some Detroit data. Let's look at balance of power. Detroit. Oh, I think I might go over housing market data instead. I can select a metro. We'll select Detroit. In Detroit, prices are up 10%, just like I was saying in the Midwest and those post-Rust Belt cities. Prices continue to rise. Now, prices in Detroit are very low compared to the rest of the country. I think they're the lowest out of any major metro at $212,000. And if you live anywhere outside of Detroit, you're probably thinking, wow, that's a really great deal. You can get on a house. Now, this price number in Detroit is a little bit misleading because there are a lot of homes in Detroit that need a lot of work. So maybe it costs $212,000 to buy it, but you need to put another $100,000 in it to make it livable or make it up to your standards. But still, the entry point in Detroit is quite low. I think sales are down though, probably because of high mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are affecting everywhere in the country. More new listings. I wonder why that is. I'll have to look into why new listings are up so much in Detroit. Maybe because prices are up, more people just feel like it's a good time to sell there. But yeah, that's it for Detroit. Okay. Somebody asked about, isn't there so much space to build there? I don't know what the there was in reference to. I'm assuming we'll see a rise in multifamily policy. That's true. It's getting easier to build multifamily housing all across the country, and that should bring more housing supply. That might be one of the reasons why new listings are up in Detroit. It might be why new listings are up in general across the country. Although in general, like new construction is kind of weak compared to the pandemic. It's up. It depends on what time period we're comparing to. But in general, at least from a policy perspective, it is getting easier and easier to build multifamily housing, which should, you know, bring more supply to the table, increase the ratio of sellers to buyers. That when there are more sellers than buyers, sellers have to bring down the price, which means housing gets more affordable. The logic of it. So there being more multifamily getting easier to build should improve affordability. It'll take a while, but it should be a tailwind to affordability. Somebody asked about Rhode Island. Okay, this is the last one I'm going to do before I move on to some bigger housing topics, but I'll bring up Providence. Rhode Island's so small that Providence, the metro area, pretty much covers all of Rhode Island. So in Providence, yeah, Providence kind of falls into this category of lower priced northeastern cities. It's not New York expensive, it's not Boston expensive, it's not DC expensive. The people from those more expensive cities go to a place like Providence in order to find housing within their budget, and that those higher income people going to Providence pushes up prices, which is why Providence home prices are up 9% from last year. I think that's like the second highest. I think only San Francisco is higher than that, up to $528,000, which is a bit above the national median. A bit more pending sales happening, up 1%. Um, the homes are taking longer to sell. Usually, when homes are taking longer to sell and the price is going up, but sales aren't increasing, that represents a shift to the luxury market because luxury homes take longer to sell and they sell for higher prices. And if you're not seeing an increase in sales, it's probably because, like, the mix is shifting into more luxury, and that's consistent with the story of higher income people perhaps moving into Providence from Boston, for example, and, m honing in on the luxury side of the market. Alright. I'm gonna I'm gonna keep it moving. So, I think we covered it for, like, this what I see as being interesting in this week's housing data. Mortgage payments housing mortgage payments went up because of mortgage rates going up. Pending sales are down because mortgage rates are up. New listings, a little tiny improvement. So at least there's silver lining there. Okay, the other news I wanted to talk about was consumer sentiment. This is like a big topic amongst econ circles, which is why is consumer sentiment so bad if the economy is not so bad? And sometimes consumer sentiment can be like a leading indicator of where the economy is headed. So maybe consumer sentiment is not aligned with where the economy is at right now, but maybe that's because things are about to get bad in the economy. So there are 2 measures of consumer sentiment, one from the University of Michigan, which is down quite a lot, another one from the Conference Board, which is down a bit. I'm gonna look at the Conference Board numbers because there's, like, extreme, so I'm gonna take a more, modest look or a less, extreme look at consumer confidence. And you can see the consumer confidence has consistently trended down since the end of the pandemic and is below what it was in the late 2010s. But GDP is better now than it was in the late 2010s. GDP growth is better. Inflation was really, really bad in 2022, and inflation is more under control now than it was in 2022, and yet consumer confidence is down. So, do people just, like, not like this economy? Is there something that's different about people's expectations of the economy that's making their sentiment worse? Their feelings about the economy are not really matching up with what economists would predict their feelings about the economy are. And maybe this is because you have these AI execs coming out on the news all the time talking about how everyone's gonna lose their jobs. That can't be good for consumer confidence. Maybe it's because people can't afford to buy homes. That can't be good for consumer confidence. So even though, like, in general, GDP is doing all right, unemployment is doing all right, and inflation, it's a little bit troublesome, but it's not as bad as it used to be, consumer confidence might be weak because the things that people really care about, their identity in the workplace, their career paths, people are worried about that because of AI, and people are worried about their inability to buy. And if that's what people really care about, their identity at work and whether they achieve the American dream, then that makes sense that consumer sentiment is down because those 2 have been trending down. Okay, cool. Oh, what else was I gonna say? Okay, this is related to consumer confidence. I'm gonna keep talking about the American consumer. So, the savings rate is now its lowest level since 2022. And what tends to happen in the economy when we get inflation, when prices go up, when gas prices go up, is that people don't, like, automatically adjust their spending habits. They keep getting as many gallons of gas as they normally do because they gotta get to work, they have plans, they're not gonna change their plans just because the price of gas goes up. They spend more on gas, maybe they're also spending more on groceries or other items in their life that they can't really know to adjust for or can't adjust for. And because these things are getting more expensive, something has to give, and what seems to be giving is people's savings rate. Here is the personal savings rate over time. The personal savings rate, as you can see now, has been 2022. In 2022, the savings rate was down because it was so high right before. This, like, shouldn't even count because people were saving so much during the pandemic because they couldn't save any money, because they couldn't spend any money because everyone was locked down. Let me say that again. People were spending a lot of money during the pandemic because they were locked inside, didn't have anywhere to spend it. Economy reopens, people start spending all that money. They don't feel the need to save because they already have so much saved up, but they start spending down their savings, savings rate drops, and then it goes back up as things normalize, but now it's down again. And this is worrisome because the last time, not counting 2022, it was this low. Let's zoom out. Can I zoom out? I'm already at 10 years max. Alright, was ooh, that's not good. Last time the savings rate was this low was during the Great recession if you don't count that post-pandemic dip. So, recession indicator? Yes, I think this is a recession indicator. Doesn't mean a recession's necessarily gonna happen, but it's a recession indicator if people are not saving money. And it's bad because if a recession were to happen, they wouldn't even have money to spend on. Like, the reason I think it's a recession indicator is because it is a harbinger of bad things to happen. People right now are adjusting to higher gas prices, or not adjusting to higher gas prices, they're just cutting their savings and continuing to spend on gas and everything else they need. But if they're not saving money, they're probably running up their credit card bills, and eventually the rubber is gonna meet the road on that, and something's gonna give, and we'll probably eventually see a decline in consumption if they're not saving right now. So it's kind of a far off recession indicator, but I think it's one that we should be paying attention to. Somebody asked about home builder sentiment. I'll bring that up really quickly. Home builder sentiment. I'm not gonna read the AI thing because that's not my. I'm gonna read it. Okay. Let's see. Sales are. All right. Sales expectations the next 6 months increase. So builder sentiment is increasing a bit. This might have been because, like I said earlier, that demand was actually increasing for homes in April, the first part of May. So that probably gave builders more optimism. But now that mortgage rates are up, that demand is waning. So by the time we get a June reading of builder sentiment, it could be lower than now. This might have just been a temporary blip because demand is starting to increase. So that's something to watch out for. I mean, I would expect this to be lower next month. Okay, back to the story about the consumer. Okay. So I talked about how consumer confidence is down, consumer savings is down. So then when we go to talk about like how like why is it that people feel bad and yet they're spending so much money? They're spending money like they don't feel bad. Well, maybe they feel bad because they have to spend this money and they don't have money left over for savings. And that could like be the missing piece between why people feel bad about the economy is because they're anticipating that they're going to be in a worse situation in the future than they are right now. Like right now, they afford their gas because they're dipping into their savings. But what happens when their savings runs out? And then what happens if they lose their job and they can't find another job? That could be why sentiment is low, even though spending is high, because people don't have like people either ready to make sacrifices in their spending or they don't know how because they need everything that they're spending money on, and that's why they feel bad because they're not saving as much and maybe they would like to. So that's one explanation. All right. Um, Okay. All right. Some other housing news to talk about. So another interesting story in the housing market coming off of Redfin News, my employer, Redfin, is that 29% of US home buyers paid cash in March, which was the lowest share for that month since 2020. So before mortgage rates went up, the housing market started being dominated by cash buyers. You can see this. Cash purchases really started to take off when mortgage rates went up in 2022, but now they're starting to trend down. Perhaps that's because people the people who wanted to pay in cash, they already paid in cash. They're not in the market anymore because they already went out and bought. Perhaps it's because, like, this class of buyer just isn't as interested in buying homes right now because they have poor consumer sentiment, and they don't think that buying a home is a good idea right now. But regardless, cash purchases, this trend is starting to wane. Which is like, I guess, good news if you're a regular home buyer who uses a mortgage to buy a home. Oftentimes, if you are in a bidding war against somebody who's paying all in cash, the seller will choose the all cash buyer because they feel like the deal is more likely to go through than if they choose a buyer who is financing their purchase. So, one like, I guess this is kind of bad news for sellers that people are paying in all cash. It's good news for buyers that they don't have to compete as much against these wealthy cash buyers. Related to that is that, the investor home purchases also fell to the lowest level since 2020. there's overlap here. Some of these investors are the cash buyers, but not all of them. But again, this is like kind of good news for first time home buyers. They don't have to compete against these all cash buyers. They don't have to compete as much against these investors. And it's a buyer's market where sellers outnumber buyers by 50%. There's 50% more sellers than there are buyers in the market. So apart from the fact that prices are way too high and mortgage rates are way too high, it's a great time to be a buyer because you can really take your time. You're not facing much competition. You're not facing competition from investors or from cash buyers. So you should be able to get your offer accepted, maybe even get the home for under asking price, have your terms, whatever terms you want, the length of escrow that you want, the inspection contingency that you want, maybe get a little cash at closing, and you can just have everything you want other than the price you want and the mortgage rate you want. But yeah, it's a in some ways a buyer's market. In some ways, buyers feel like they're the losers. But if you are one of the few people that can afford to buy a home right now, it's looking good for you. Okay. Oh yeah, and then the other story that I was going to go into was just about affordability in general. So it talked about how it's a good time to be a buyer. What does that really mean? Like from an affordability perspective, buying a home is much less affordable now than it was during or before the pandemic. Is there a way I can like adjust this? If I can. Let me zoom in. Right. Got the ad to go away. Okay, so back in 2019, you only needed to earn 600 yeah, $62,000 a year to be able to afford the median priced home at the prevailing home prices and mortgage rates in 2019. And this number stayed fairly stable through 2020. But then the pandemic happened and mortgage rates went down for a bit while prices also went up, but those two offset each other in 2020. Starting in 2021, the prices kept going up to the point that affording a home became you had to earn more money to afford a home, even though mortgage rates were so low, prices had gone up so much that you needed to earn more money to be able to afford the median priced home. And then 2022, mortgage rates started going up and prices didn't go down. Prices stayed high, even increased a little bit. So the income needed to afford a home went from here $62,000 in 2020, $72,000 in 2021, up to $103,000 a year is what you needed to earn to afford a home in 2022. And mortgage rates spiked, but they kept going up. Prices kept going up slower than they used to, but they kept going up. And starting around 2023, you need to earn $116,000 to afford a home. And we've been in this level of affordability since then. It's April 2026 this data is based on, and you need to earn 116 or $117,000 in order to afford the median priced home. So that's down a bit from last year. Last year you need to earn 119 or say yeah, $119,000 to afford the median priced home. So it's good news that affordability is a bit better than it was last year. Zooming out, we are so far away from what affordability looked like back in the 2010s or even 2020. Now wages have gone up. I should have graphed this against wages. Um, because like obviously we had like 9% inflation during 2022. So like a good chunk of this is just pure inflation. And affordability might actually be like a little bit better once you adjust for inflation because I'm pretty sure I have this data somewhere. Where was it? I know I have this here. Yes. Okay. Hourly earnings are up 3.6% from last year. So not only have prices come down in the last year, but wages have increased 3.6%. So people in general are earning more money and they need less money and able to afford a home. So if we're just comparing 2025 to 2026, things have gotten more affordable. But I feel like when I tell this to people, they look at me like I'm an idiot because they can't afford to buy a home. So if I'm telling them housing has gotten more affordable and they're like, "What are you talking about? It's like the least affordable it's ever been." It's not the least affordable it's ever been. It was less affordable last year. Maybe you weren't looking to buy a home last year. But if you're comparing it to 2023, 2022, pre-pandemic, it is way more expensive to buy a home than it used to be. So I get where people are coming from when they say that, like, housing is so unaffordable, it's the most unaffordable. Technically, no. It was more unaffordable last year. But what good is that to somebody trying to buy a home? Probably not much good. All right, let me go back to the questions. I see I have some questions here, and I got through all the general news I wanted to talk about. All right. How much do you anticipate home values to fluctuate in the short term in this economy? This is from Anthony Q over on LinkedIn. I think home values are going to be pretty stable. I think so. Right now, home prices, which isn't exactly home values, home prices are up about 2% from last year, which is slower than the pace of inflation. Inflation is like a little over 3%. So if we're talking about inflation adjusted home values, those are probably actually falling. But because of the money illusion is like that people don't notice inflation very much. They just look at like nominal prices. Um, People still like see that their home value is going up and they probably feel fine about that. They're only getting a 2% increase. They would be much more upset if their home value went down in nominal terms. They don't really notice when it's going down in inflation adjusted terms as long as that nominal sticker price continues to go up. And I think we're going to be in a situation for a while. I think for the next like 5 years, maybe longer. I mean, there could always be some kind of weird events in the economy that change things. I would bet that prices are going to go up 2 to 3%, maybe like about the same pace as inflation, maybe a little bit slower than inflation, a little bit slower than wage growth, which will continue this pattern of improving affordability in inflation adjusted terms or in income adjusted terms, but not improving affordability in just like sticker prices, which is, I mean, what we care about as economists is the inflation adjusted stuff, but consumers might not like notice it. Homeowners might not notice it. Homeowners will get mad or get like they want something to be done when their homes go down in value, but they don't really notice it unless it's sticker price value, not inflation adjusted value. So to answer your question, like I think prices will be pretty stable. I think prices will be pretty stable, growing slightly slower than inflation, slightly slower than wage growth, allowing affordability to improve, and that this will be the general pattern for the next 5 years because prices went up so much during the pandemic that we had like 5 years of price growth just like crammed into that 2 year period. That it's going to be a while until that unwinds, and it unwinds by prices just growing slower than inflation and growing slower than wages for a long period of time. And even if mortgage rates were to drop, even if we get this deal announced, the Strait of Hormuz is reopening, and mortgage rates drop, I don't think prices are going to go up very much. The reason I don't think prices are going to go up like they normally do when mortgage rates drop, because normally when mortgage rates drop, it brings back buyers to the market, but doesn't change the number of sellers. This next time will be different. When mortgage rates drop, we will see buyers come back to the market, but we will also see more listings of homes because these people who have been waiting to sell their home because they don't want to give up their low mortgage rate won't feel like they're giving up as much when mortgage rates drop. And that's especially true for move up buyers. And you might be saying, well, Daryl, these sellers who are selling just to buy again, they add to demand too. And yes, that's true. But some of those people will be downsizers. Some of those people will be buying new construction. People buying new construction are adding supply to the market. So that won't be a price accelerant. We've also seen a lot of progress on making it easier to build homes. Road to housing bill looks like it's going to get passed. There's been a lot of state and local efforts to make it easier to build housing. So I think the next time we get mortgage rates that come down and we get the housing market like up and going again, it will be in a healthier state than it is right now, and hopefully an even healthier state than it was before the pandemic. Supply was very constricted. So that'll take a while, though. All right. Do we have any other questions over on TikTok? Mm-hmm. Some people talking about construction. Okay. Well, I got through everything that I wanted to talk about. I will open it up for questions from the audience. I wonder if my Instagram questions are coming through. Okay, I have a question over on Instagram. Oh wait, yeah, let me read these. Sorry, Instagram, I didn't mean to neglect you. Okay, so I don't know how to say that. LK said that the San Francisco Fed released a study that productivity has been relatively high. What does this mean for the everyday person? Why have wages been relatively stagnant despite productivity. Let me look up productivity via Fred. Non-farm business sector productivity output for all workers. Oops, or just 1 year. Let's go to 5 years. This is growth. Well, according to this measure, productivity growth. I mean, we had some good quarters for productivity growth. It doesn't look that much better. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong metric compared to what other people were looking at. But let's answer this question more broadly. So, hypothetically, the advent of AI is going to make workers more productive because we have this technological innovation that should mean that people can do more in less amount of time. Maybe this is showing up in the data. We've seen some good quarters of productivity growth. It'll probably take a long time to show up in the data. Maybe it won't show up in the data at all because people will just use AI to do the same amount of work and not really like and spend more time doing things that aren't productive, if that makes sense. But in general, what this means for the everyday person, in theory, is that when worker productivity increases, hypothetically, wages should increase because hiring a worker is more profitable to companies and they want to hire more workers when they become productive so that they can like produce even more. But at the same time, there's this trade-off between productivity of labor and productivity of capital. Capital is like machines, right? So when people become more productive, maybe they take that increased profit and they just use it to like buy more tokens or whatever, AI tokens. They don't put that into hiring more workers, they put it into just like continuing to make the few workers that they have more productive. When unemployment goes up, you get an increase in productivity just because firms in general are like doing more with fewer workers. So the metric of productivity is really fraught. It's like really hard to interpret exactly what it means. But the theory of productivity suggests that if the economy is getting more productive, if workers are getting more productive, we should be getting richer. But in practice, because of inequality, you might not see that richness distributed evenly in the economy. And this person says, why have wages been relatively stagnant despite productivity? Well, wages, where's that little thing about wages? Wages are up 3.6%. And that's in a normal year, a great increase, 3.6% increase in everybody's wages on average. That's a good thing. Unfortunately, though, inflation is up 3.8%. So I'm going to blame the Strait of Hormuz being closed on this. Maybe everybody would feel richer right now if they weren't paying more for gas and groceries and all that. All right, I got some more questions on Instagram. Let me look at this. All right, somebody asked, do you have any Benny 1295? Hey Benny, I hope you're still in the chat. Do you have any advice for fresh PhD graduates struggling on a worsening job market since the last 2 to 3 years? Yes, my advice would be to make yourself and the work that you do and your capabilities as visible as possible. I know this can be an adjustment if you're not the kind of person who likes to post on LinkedIn. That could be hard to do. But if I was trying to find a job right now, I would be posting every single day on LinkedIn, maybe on Twitter too, or Blue Sky or whatever your preferred social media is. And I would be talking about the projects that I'm working on. You don't need permission from an employer to utilize your skills and to work on projects that display your skills. And I think in the world of AI, what people don't it's harder to assess who can get things done and who is just relying on AI. Firms don't want to hire workers that just do what AI does because why would they hire you to do something that AI can do when they can just tell AI to do it instead? So what they want to see is you bringing a project to completion. Because it's one thing to go to ChatGPT and have it write a report on how you do a project. It's an entirely other skill to follow through on a project and make something that is of value to the world. So if you're a fresh PhD graduate, I would say just like start working on something that's interesting to you, that you think could be valuable to an employer, that you would want to work for, and post about it every single day. And if you do that, eventually somebody will comment on what you're posting, tell you if they like it, You DM them and say, "Hey, can I ask you about what you do for work?" And that is your way of networking and finding job opportunities and building trust with people who give you jobs so that they know that you are the kind of person who can do these kinds of projects that's even better than AI. In a world of AI, it will become very cheap to do average things. But because we live in a competitive economy, if firms want to succeed, they have to be better than just average, because otherwise they're gonna get outcompeted by another average firm. If they wanna have customers, they need to prove to customers that their product is better than the average stuff that's being produced by some other company that's just relying on AI. So, yeah, that's my advice. If you wanna get a job, show that you are better than AI, show that you can add value, even if it's on top of work that AI does, that you are the person who can bring things to completion, that you're the kind of person that can talk to people and build relationships with people. That's something that AI can't do. And I think, like, it's always been true that it's about who you know when it comes to getting a job. And the way you get people to know you is by being very public about the work that you do. Because if you're doing things in private, no one's ever going to know. Okay, somebody had a question. HG Win. In tech, layoffs continue to increase and average salary has decreased. Oh, yeah, this is more of a comment. I've seen home prices drop in these areas since last year and continue to. Yeah, home prices. So it's the I was talking earlier about how in San Francisco, home prices are up. If you look at a map of where home prices are up, I don't have the map right in front of me. Be cool if I did. It's in a YouTube video I made called "Is there an AI housing bubble?" or something like that. You can go look at my YouTube page. Anyway, there's a map in there that shows that prices are up or close to AI company headquarters. Prices are down in like the East Bay. In Seattle, where there aren't as many AI companies, home prices are down. AI has been like in Seattle, tech companies like Amazon and Microsoft are downsizing. They're not hiring people, and that's impacting the housing market in a completely different way than we're seeing in the San Francisco luxury market, where AI money is fueling home purchases. In Seattle, these layoffs are seem to be negatively impacting home buyers, which makes sense. Okay. HG1 says, "What's the current outlook on cost of labor and materials tied to builder sentiment?" I think the outlook is pretty it's in it's overall bad, I guess is what I would say. Materials are expensive because of the tariffs. Tariffs were big news last year. Maybe like that's not getting as much attention as it used to, but the tariffs are still in effect, and they're making some of these builder inputs, materials more expensive. They're not getting more and more expensive because the tariffs have already been set, but they're, like, more expensive than they were before the tariffs. And then labor, I think, is, like, a very underappreciated constraint on construction. The YIMBYs, the people who wanna build lots more dense housing, have been very focused on upzoning and reducing red tape for building housing. But when you talk to the builders, they talk about how there's a lack of labor. And with the current immigration policy, we don't have immigrant labor to rely on either. So if mortgage rates were to drop and we were to see an increase in demand for housing, we might not get as much of a boom in construction as I would hope for because of these constraints on labor. It's really it takes a long time to train somebody to be a construction worker. Being a construction worker is a very labor intensive, difficult job. So that's one of the reasons why immigrant labor can fill the gap there. But if we're not letting immigrants into the country, even on work visas, then the construction industry is going to have a hard time. And that's going to drive up the cost of construction and lead to fewer homes being built just because of that lack of labor. If I was a policymaker, I'd be saying, like, we need to create some way to train people who are getting displaced from their work in AI to become construction laborers. But, like, what are we gonna expect the person who used to work on Excel spreadsheets to go pick up a hammer and become a construction worker? Like, I don't think that's gonna happen. I think the way out of it is probably through immigration policy. So maybe we'll see something happen there in the future, but right now it's not looking that great. So fortunately, that's gonna be bad news for new construction. Okay, I'm gonna hop over to my other comments. Do you have any other comments? Other questions? Okay, I don't see any others. Let's see. Do you have any final thoughts before I before I end this live stream? Um, I guess I'll just reiterate that, just to summarize, like, where we're at in terms of the housing market. We had a slow start to the year, not very many homes being purchased in January, February, not much buyer activity in January, February, probably because the weather was bad, because mortgage rates were kind of low back then. Mortgage rates went up because the Strait of Hormuz closed, but buyers kind of ignored that and came back to the market once the weather was better, and mortgage rates were for a while lower than they were in 2025. The income needed to afford a median priced home is lower than it was in 2025, but increase in demand was justified. Now that the war in Iran is dragging on, there's a timeline for the Strait of Hormuz reopening, mortgage rates continue to climb. It seems like the momentum from buyers is starting to die off again, which doesn't look good for the rest of the spring and summer housing market. But if the Strait of Hormuz were to reopen, we'd probably get a lot of demand. Hopefully, it is announced there's a deal struck before the end of the housing season. It'd be great if a deal came through like this week or next week. That'd be great. But if it comes later in the year, like towards the end of summer, it's going to be too little, too late for this year in terms of home sales. And then the other thing, like if you're a home buyer, okay, let me say it. This is what they always ask me in interviews. What advice do you give to a home buyer, or what should home buyers know right now? Home buyers should know that they have all the cards. They can negotiate prices that are below asking price. They can ask for the terms that they want, like the escrow period they want, the inspection contingencies they want. You might even be able to negotiate cash at closing. And it is more affordable to buy a home this year than it was last year. So all good news for buyers. But it doesn't take away from the fact that it's still way too expensive to buy a home. Prices are prohibitively high, mortgage rates are prohibitively high for most people. So most people have just given up on buying a home altogether. That's probably why consumer sentiment is bad right now. So if you're one of these people who's on the margin between buying a home or not, it's good news. You have more negotiating power now. But if you've already been priced out like years ago, then this doesn't really mean much to you. And then for sellers, what I would tell sellers is that we're seeing more sellers come to the market, which means as a seller, you're going to be facing more competition from other sellers. So you need to get realistic about your prices. Maybe that means you pre-list your home and you kind of test the market so you know when you're ready to actually go wide on your listing, you know exactly how to price it. Or it means that you just price competitively from the very beginning, and that will get your home sold. If you price too high, your home's gonna sit on the market, which maybe you don't care, you'll wait. But for a lot of people, they have a mortgage that they would really like to stop paying, and they would like to sell their home as quickly as possible, which means that you have to get more aggressive on pricing low. So that's my advice. Always good advice to, you know, get your home nice, make it look really nice, get the beautiful listing photos. That's always good advice as a seller. So I'll throw that in too. All right. Thank you so much for coming to my live. I will be doing this every Thursday, same time, same place, unless I'm on vacation. If I'm not here, it's because I'm at the beach. It's summer, but I'll be here next week. All right. Bye.